There is a room in every human mind where unfinished things are stored, and most people never visit this room deliberately. They walk past its door 1,000 times, feel the faint pull of something unresolved calling from behind it, and choose instead to keep moving, telling themselves they'll deal with it eventually. But eventually rarely comes on its own. And the things left unfinished in that room do not stay quiet. They accumulate weight, year after year, until one day a person realizes they are dragging an entire warehouse of abandoned attempts, unspoken words, and half-built dreams behind them, wondering why their present life feels so heavy when they cannot name a single specific cause. This is the burden of unfinished business, and it is one of the most underestimated forces shaping human potential. Not the grand failures people discuss openly, but the quiet, half-completed things. The book started and abandoned at chapter 3, the apology never given, the business plan drafted and buried in a drawer, the relationship ended without ever saying what actually needed to be said. Each of these, left unfinished, does not simply disappear because you stopped thinking about it. It remains, incomplete, consuming a portion of your mental and emotional energy indefinitely, the way an open program continues consuming memory on a computer long after you've stopped looking at its window. Napoleon Hill understood something profound about the mind that most people never grasp. It cannot fully commit its energy to new pursuits while a portion of that energy remains tied up in old, unresolved ones. This is why so many people feel a strange, low-grade exhaustion even when their current life appears, from the outside, to be relatively calm. The exhaustion is not always coming from what they are currently doing. Often, it is coming from what they never finished, never said, never fully released, 100 small, unclosed loops, each one quietly siphoning attention that could otherwise be devoted entirely to the life in front of them. Consider the specific unfinished business currently living inside you, because it is there, whether you have named it or not. Perhaps it is a dream you abandoned halfway, telling yourself it was impractical, when in truth you simply lost your nerve at the exact moment it required more courage than you were willing to summon. Perhaps it is a relationship that ended in silence, where words that needed to be spoken were swallowed instead, and now live permanently lodged in your chest, resurfacing at inconvenient moments, disguised as unrelated irritation or unexplained sadness. Perhaps it is a skill you once pursued with real passion, then quietly let atrophy, and some part of you still grieves the person you might have become had you continued. This unfinished business does not remain neutral simply because you have stopped actively thinking about it. It calcifies into a kind of internal debt, and like all debt, it accrues interest the longer it goes unaddressed. The interest on unfinished business is paid in the currency of diminished confidence, because every unclosed loop becomes, quietly, evidence in your own mind that you are someone who does not finish what they start. This is far more damaging than the specific unfinished thing itself. It is not simply that you abandoned one dream, one apology, one pursuit. It is that the abandonment becomes a pattern your own subconscious begins to expect from you, and that expectation, once established, begins sabotaging future attempts before they even properly begin, because some part of you has already concluded, based on the evidence of your own unfinished history, that finishing simply isn't something you do. This is the first truth about unfinished business that must be confronted directly. It is not a passive accumulation of harmless loose ends. It is an active force, shaping your identity through the silent verdict it delivers every time you notice it, even peripherally, and quietly choose to look away again. The person who has a decade of unfinished pursuits scattered behind them is not simply carrying a decade of specific incomplete tasks. They are carrying a decade of evidence, self-generated, confirming an identity of incompletion that then becomes nearly impossible to escape, because the mind, desperate for consistency, will continue producing behavior that matches whatever identity it has already concluded is true. Consider how differently your current pursuits might unfold if you did not carry this accumulated weight of prior abandonment. The business idea you are considering now would not need to fight against a subconscious narrative built from every previous half-finished attempt. The difficult conversation you know you need to have would not be complicated by the residue of every previous conversation you avoided or cut short before saying what actually needed to be said. Every new pursuit, in other words, is not beginning on neutral ground. It is beginning on ground already shaped, often unfavorably, by everything you have left unfinished before it, and pretending this history has no bearing on your present capacity is simply refusing to acknowledge the actual mechanics of how identity and confidence are constructed. There is a second truth about unfinished business, and it concerns the specific, often uncomfortable process required to actually close these old loops rather than simply continuing to avoid them. Most people, when they finally acknowledge an old piece of unfinished business, immediately search for a way to resolve it without discomfort, a shortcut that allows them to feel closure without actually confronting whatever made the business unfinished in the first place. This rarely works, because the discomfort that caused the abandonment originally does not disappear simply because time has passed. It must be faced directly, often years later, with the same courage that was required originally, except now compounded by the additional weight of having avoided it for so long. This is why closing unfinished business often feels disproportionately difficult compared to how it would have felt to simply finish the thing originally. The apology that would have taken a single uncomfortable conversation years ago now requires confronting not only the original offense but the additional years of silence that followed it. The dream abandoned in youth now requires confronting not only the original fear that caused the abandonment, but the additional years of watching that fear be validated by inaction, making the eventual attempt feel even more exposed, even more fraught with the possibility of proving that the original doubt was correct all along. But here is what must be understood clearly: the difficulty of closing old unfinished business, however real, does not compare to the difficulty of continuing to carry it indefinitely. The person who finally has the difficult conversation they avoided for years experiences one concentrated period of discomfort, followed by genuine release. The person who continues avoiding it experiences a diffuse, low-grade discomfort indefinitely, stretched across years, never concentrated enough to demand resolution, but never absent enough.